trabajadores de mi patria, tengo fe en Chile y su destino. Sigan ustedes sabiendo que mucho más temprano que tarde, de nuevo, abrirán las grandes alamedas por donde pase el hombre libre para construir una sociedad mejor. ¡Viva Chile! ¡Viva el pueblo! ¡Vivan los trabajadores!
From the 1960s on, the United States interfered in Chilean politics, keeping the presidency away from the socialist candidate Salvador Allende. This turned out to be all for naught, as Allende was elected president by the Chilean Congress in 1970. This presented a severe threat to the evolving American foreign policy of containment, so the United States began to take steps to remove the communist influence. On September 11th of 1973, General Augusto Pinochet ordered the Chilean Air Force to attack the presidential palace, La Moneda, funded by the United States. This event marked his formal seizure of power and the downfall of Allende and the Unidad Popular. Pinochet was president of the government junta from 1973 to 1981. He was in military control from 1973 to 1990 and commander-in-chief of the Chilean army until 1998.
Politics of Chile will have to continue being what it has always been, a democratic, freedom-loving country, with freedom to worship, to think, to work. Not a normal democracy. It must be strong to repress anything which might try to destroy this idea of democracy.
His crimes continued with the United States turning a blind eye. He carried out mass executions, imprisonments, and terror with the help of his secret police, the DIMA, in the name of preserving democracy. During his time in power, Pinochet was responsible for the imprisonment of 80,000, the torture of 30,000, and the murder of 3,000 Chileans.
Eduardo Palominos Rojas.
¿Era militante de algún partido político?
Simpatizante de izquierda soy.
¿Y desde cuándo está aquí?
Yo llegué acá a este campo el día 10 de diciembre, al Estadio Nacional, el día 13 de septiembre.
Mario Ursúa. ¿De dónde es?
Yo soy de Santiago también, estudiante universitario de la Universidad Técnica del Estado.
¿Era militante de algún partido político?
No.
¿Y por qué está aquí?
No está claro cuál es mi acusación en concreto. Está por clarificarse.
Pinochet's ideology followed the concept of national restoration. Though we often label Pinochet as a fascist, his regime isn't really typically included in the academically classified fascist countries, like Hitler's Germany or Mussolini's Italy. Pinochet's real ideology was more of a pseudo-populist dictatorship that allowed him to maintain strict power while still making efforts to identify with the working class. He was right-wing, traditionalist, ultranationalist, and anti-communist, all operating within an authoritarian government. However, the regime also emphasized the simulation of the economy and a transition to capitalism. Pinochet wanted to create a market economy in his authoritarian state. The United States had wanted Allende out of power for years now, and looked the other way while Pinochet oppressed his people because the new regime was much more welcoming to U.S. economic influence, as shown by the remarkable influence of the Chicago Boys, Chilean economists trained at the University of Chicago and advocating for completely free markets. The American government, more specifically Kissinger, was often criticized for the hypocrisy of this relationship. There were two sides to the propaganda that Pinochet employed to maintain control. The first side involved influence in the media that propagated the image of Pinochet as a benevolent leader protecting the Chileans from the communists. Newspapers influenced by the government covered up the deaths of young socialists and other enemies of the state by claiming they were killed by guerrilla forces and not by the state's Operation Colombo, which used the media to cover up the disappearances and deaths of over 100 young Chileans. Pinochet also used allegations that the reports of his killings, fascist methods, and concentration camps were all communist propaganda, perpetrated by the supporters of the deposed Allende. Because of this, he managed to continue his reign of terror far beyond what was previously acceptable. Furthermore, his focus on military force allowed him to depend on propagandic persuasion far less than the threat of his secret police and efforts of keeping the people in line. Pinochet used disinformation more as a way to avoid international intervention in his fascist tactics, as opposed to garnering public support for his regime.
In 1980, Pinochet passed a new constitution, allowing him to remain in power for another 8 years and retain presidential powers for another year after that. However, as 1988 approached, public and international support for Pinochet dwindled, and it became clear that he would most likely lose the vote as he started lifting some of the more strict election regulations that had been imposed for so many years. He lost to Patricio Elwin and gave it the presidency in 1990. This did not end his political influence in Chile, as the 1980 Constitution ensured he would remain commander-in-chief for the army until 1998, when he was then sworn in as a senator for life, another stipulation of the 1980 Constitution. In late 1998, Pinochet was arrested in Great Britain, but later released in 2000, and thus began a long court battle when it came to Pinochet's human rights violations. Throughout the early 2000s, many cases were brought against him because of the actions of the DINA, but Pinochet died in 2006 with no official sentencing. As of 1981, Chile began functioning under an amended constitution. Today, Chile is a multi-party system with an elected president, who serves a 4-year term and cannot be re-elected. As under an amended constitution. Today, Chile is a multi-party system with an election president, damn it. As of 1981, Chile began functioning under an amended constitution.